Ananya Kumar. She is the Associate Director at Atlantic Council based in Washington, D.C. Ananya, welcome to Bloomberg HD.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
My first question is, which countries have made the most progress on CBDCs in this year? What are your recent report highlights and takeaways?
Right. So as you know, the Atlantic Council produces research on central bank digital currency or CBDC research around the world. We track developments in about 130 countries, which represent about 98% of the world's GDP. What we've seen is that a vast majority of those countries are moving towards advanced stages of development. About 64 of those countries are in the advanced phase of CBDC development, which usually means that they're developing proof of concepts or they're testing them out in pilot stages or they're full scale launching them. So those are some of the top line numbers that I have for our CBDC project. And just as a way of comparison, when we started this project in 2020, only 35 countries were developing them. So you've seen quite a bit of jump in the number of countries that are exploring CBDCs.
And any highlights from Turkey on your report?
Yeah, so we've been tracking Turkey's development for a long time, and we say Turkey is what we call the pilot stage of its development, and actually wrapped up a pilot with a few of its commercial bank. The central bank wrapped up a pilot with a few of its commercial bank in last December. And it's looking like Turkey is looking to launch its digital currency later this year. That's what a few of the reports we've seen come out as.
And regarding the US-China relationship, Secretary Blinken was in China, then Secretary Yellen went to China, reduced the tension between two countries. What China wants from its digital currencies, do you see the partnership or collaboration when it comes to digital currency?
That's a great question. So China's been developing its own digital currency, which is called the e-yuan or eCNY since 2016, 2017. And they develop it in both a retail sense, so in a way that would let me buy a cup of coffee from a cafe, but also a wholesale sense, in the sense that in the way that banks settle money with each other. So China's been developing these projects for quite a while now, and it is now in the pilot stage. It's been in pilot stage since 2019. I have a recent piece out that's called Practice Makes Perfect that talks about the ways in which China is experimenting with its CBDC, eCNY, the different kinds of tests it's doing in terms of stimulus payments, paying government employees, paying for public transit, and are just a few examples of that. And you're right, there's a lot of US officials in China recently, and there's a question of how China's CBDC development impacts sort of US foreign policy, or what are the national security considerations. I think we have to be careful here. There's sort of severe there's a lot of questions about China CBDC that are still out in the open. Does it preserve people's privacy? Will people be allowed to conduct all kinds of transactions? Will they be prohibited? So any kind of collaboration can only happen when there's a lot more transparency, and that's not the stage right now. So I don't see that as an avenue of collaboration between the two countries.
Mm-hmm. And another question, can you update us on developing a US bank-to-bank digital currency? Any progress on this site?
Sure. So the US has been researching a retail digital currency for quite some time now. It produced an executive order from the president's office last year and last March, which directed about 15 agencies to start doing research on digital currencies. And our Federal Reserve has been researching on it as well with Project Hamilton with MIT. On the bank-to-bank side, the US got in the game with Project Cinar last year, which is a collaboration with the New York Federal Reserve and the Bank of Singapore. And both are researching a bank-to-bank digital currency. And this has enormous implications for how we settle money currently. And there's a potential that we could make international payments much faster, much cheaper, much safer than they are right now.
And since you mentioned also White House released a comprehensive framework for responsible developing of digital assets last September. Where are we on the legal aspects of central bank digital currency?
Right. And that report was not just about CBDCs, although they were a part of it. It was also about developing cryptocurrency legislation and regulation within the United States. So where we are in terms of legal aspect, there's a few legal questions that the report was looking to answer, which is about the authority of the Federal Reserve in issuing a central bank digital currency. It's very clear to us that the Federal Reserve can issue banknotes and sort of change that we use on a day-to-day basis. But when it's digitized, who really has the authority was a little bit unclear last year. But from all indications, what we've been told is that the Federal Reserve will require congressional authorization, so legislative authorization, in order to issue a central bank digital currency. So that's where we stand on the sort of legal parts of it.
Mm-hmm. And Anya, last question. If you list top 3 countries, central banks, which ones are the leading right now when it comes to CBDC, like top 3 ones?
Right. So that's a very difficult question to answer because there's more than three. But I would point to the European Central Bank, which is coming out with a pilot later this year of the digital euro and has been doing quite a lot of work in getting public traction and for the public to use it. So that would be sort of my number one and a place to look out for next year. China is always in the conversation because of the different ways in which it tests out its CBDCs and the larger implications around the world. And then I would say the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, where a lot of central banks have already launched a CBDC and are working through what is an important case study of CBDC, which is, they have a very dispersed geography. Oftentimes, it's very hard to have internet connections and banks being built when there's sort of climate issues. So I think it's a very interesting case study for a CBDC.